Are you here?
I am. I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's so great to talk to you. And shout out to
You,
Dallas for working all the technicals and stuff. And Rachel, you guys just are rocking it today. Thank you. All right, so Lauren, you look great. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So good to see you again. So good to see you. So I'm just going to let you dive right in and tell your whole story, because you have I say everyone has a unique story. Everyone does, and yours is definitely unique too. So please share your family's journey.
All right. Well, I am a CDH survivor. I'm 34. My story is a little bit different when I was a baby in the fact that my parents did not know about my CDH until I was 10 weeks old. I came screaming. My mother said that I was the worst infant ever, and I screamed constantly and vomited all the time. After one day, my grandmother watching me, she pretty much handed me back to my mom and said, "Take her to the doctors. There's something not wrong. No, there's not something wrong with her." So my mom took me to the doctor the next day. The doctor had me nursed right there so he could see what I would do after I would eat, which would constantly throw up. And as soon as he saw me vomit, the red flags went up for him. He had my mom take me to get a upper GI, and that's when they discovered that my stomach was up beside my heart. So they had a surgeon come down, Dr. Miner. Actually, my mom and I dug through the pictures and found a picture of him because he saved my life. And so we had a surgeon come down from Pennsylvania, and him and another doctor, Dr. Singh, performed my surgeries. Dr. Singh was brought in because he just recently performed a CDH surgery on a 3-year-old. So he had a little experience working with older children with, with this birth defect. But they did my surgery. It was, it was much less research back then than what there is now. And of course, I know you know that, and they didn't really know if I was going to survive the story or survive the surgery. And every single time when I heard a story, all I heard was that I was a miracle baby. I was a miracle baby. I shouldn't have lived for 10 weeks with it. But here I am. And honestly, that was the hardest part of my CDH journey, is that, when I was an infant, because growing up, I never had any issues. I didn't have any breathing problems. I didn't have any eating problems. I was athletic. I have a really, really ugly scar. But other than that, that was the worst of my issues until I started having my own children, and I ended up having a child with CDH. That's the twist of my story. That's when my CDH journey, I feel like, really began, going through it from the parents' point of view. Because again, growing up, it was nothing more than a scar for me as a child. But as a parent, it was much different. We did not find out my daughter, Natalie, had CDH until she was 3 years old. But she also had tons of eating issues. She was very, very underweight, very tall, so she was still gaining weight, but she was never on that chart for her weight. She was always not even on the chart for her weight, off the charts for her height. And so we just always thought that that was her genetic makeup, that, she was always going to be a tall, thin child. But when she was hitting the 2 to 2.5 is when we really started to know how emaciating she was getting. And so many things happened at once with Natalie. She was, we had her in gymnastics, and I have a picture of her here. Oops, where's the camera? So how skinny she is. And she always had like a little round face, so you could never really tell with clothes, but her little arms were just like little twigs, and she couldn't make it through a typical 30-minute gymnastics lesson for little kids without laying on the ground wanting to go to sleep. And she never ate. She was the worst eater. We had her, but we always thought it was an oral aversion. We just thought she was a picky eater and a sensory issue. So we put her in OT. We did 18 months, a year and a half of OT, and got her to eat a few more things. But for the most part, she liked dry, crunchy fruit. She liked what did she like? She liked Cheerios, dry pretzels, crackers, goldfish, anything dry and crunchy she would eat. And that's it. And so we worked with her and would get so upset because she would stick her little long fingers down her mouth and make herself throw up. And so whenever we thought we got a decent meal in her, because we had a 2.5-year-old still eating baby food because she would eat baby food bananas. But, you know, when you're a desperate mom and that's the only fruit or vegetable that your child would eat, you give it to them. And so we would think we fed her a great meal. She ate one baby food container and a couple Cheerios as a 2-year-old. Then we would watch her stick her fingers down her throat and make herself throw up. And it was just so frustrating. And we would get so upset. And so upset at her because, you know, we thought she was doing it on purpose. But when a couple months before she turned 3, she was going to be dismissed from the OT program because in our state you can only receive occupational therapy up until the age of 3 with an IFSP unless you have another disability. And she didn't have any other disabilities. She was meeting all of her other milestones, no problem. So our pediatrician, you know, was pushing us to do a feeding clinic at a local children's hospital. But we were just trying to avoid that. But again, so many things happened at once. We were noticed how skinny she was getting with gymnastics. My mother was screaming at me that, not literally screaming at me, but just pushing me that this child's not eating. She's, you know, she's getting sicker and thinner and just, I needed to do something. So I finally broke down and called the feeding clinic, and they were just kind of going through routine questions. Does she do this? Does she do this? And they got to the one that, does she throw up? And I'm like, well, yeah, but she makes herself throw up. And so the secretary instantly said, nope, you have to have all physical problems ruled out before you can enter into the program. So she said, you need to see an upper GI and a pediatric upper GI specialist just to make sure there's nothing wrong with her. So, and it happened to be a day or two later, we were going to see our normal pediatrician for her 3-year-old checkup. So we scheduled an appointment with a GI specialist, but that wasn't for like another week and a half. But in the meantime, again, we saw our pediatrician just for her normal routine, you know, checkup. And we told her about the throwing up because I had never mentioned it to her before. Because again, I thought it was just behavioral. The whole time I thought she was just, you know, being stubborn and just kind of being a picky eater. And I never understood why she was sticking her fingers down the throat, but now I know why. So the pediatrician said, okay, if we're going to see a GI specialist, the first things that they're going to want is an upper GI study. And so she said, go ahead and we'll order that now so you can take that to her and kind of get one step out of the way. So we did, and then like a day or two later, I scheduled her upper GI. My mom actually went with me to this appointment because my father came and was watching our younger daughter. We have 2 daughters. And so he was at home watching her, and my mom and I went to take Natalie to get her upper GI. And that was a fight in itself because, again, I had to get her to drink barium. But we did, you know, finally got her to drink enough barium to do the study. And I did a lot of research, so I knew the study was going to take about 10, 15 minutes. And then after a minute and a half, he stopped and he said, okay, we're done. And I was so frustrated because I'm like, I don't want to do this again. I can get her to lay still, just finish the study. And he said, nope, I have all the information I need. And he turned to the screen to me and he said, here's her heart. And then he's like, and he pointed to this little teeny tiny circle and he said, here's her stomach. And he said, her stomach's the size of a newborn's. And my world just crashed at that moment and then I turned to him and I said, she has a diaphragmatic hernia, doesn't he? And then his face went white because he said, and then his response was, how do you know what that is? And I said, well, I had one. So at that point, I was just beyond devastated because here I knew exactly what it was going to mean. I didn't know as much about CDH as I did now because I never researched it for myself. It was, you know, it was in my past, so I didn't look up information on it, but I knew she was going to have surgery. I knew I was considered a miracle child and that I should have not even have lived through the night. And I didn't know if my daughter had that exact same future. So it was just a surreal moment, but I just remember I couldn't listen to him anymore. I couldn't focus on him because Natalie was squirming and crying and just wanted to get out and get done and be done with this test. So I just had him pause for a second. I grabbed her and then I took her out to my mom who was sitting in the waiting room waiting. And I handed Natalie to my mom and then I just looked at her and I said, she has what I had. And then I saw my mom's face crash because, again, she had to now relive this whole thing that she lived with me. She's now having to relive it again. And so my parents have been through it twice. They had to go through the heartache of having an upper GI and discovering my CDH, and now they had to go through an upper GI and discover my daughter's CDH. So, you know, I went back in the room and talked with him, and he was amazed that I had it and that I even knew what it was, you know, which is sad in itself because people should know what it is. But a million phone calls later between pediatricians, surgeons, we're very fortunate where we live. We live very close to Baltimore, so we have a wonderful network of hospitals between Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, just tons of wonderful hospitals. And so I told and we're very close to Philadelphia. We're very fortunate. So I pretty much told my pediatrician, we will go anywhere, travel anywhere. But she had a nurse practitioner who was working in her office who worked with a surgeon at University of Maryland, Dr. Strauch. He's our other hero. There he is, right there with my daughter. And he was the doctor that we were recommended to go to at University of Maryland. So my pediatrician called around and, you know, pretty much demanded that we get an appointment with him. So we got an appointment with him the next day. And he examined us and assured us that, yes, she has this. Yes, she'll need surgery. But she's as healthy as she, you know, she's not going to perish away that next day, and that you know, it wasn't an emergency, that she was still functioning normally. She, you know, she was still a typical 3-year-old kid and active. So that helped talking with him, that we knew she was breathing fine. This wasn't affecting her lungs. This wasn't, you know, other than her eating, which again, we had been dealing with for 3 years, she was going to be okay. So that was just wonderful to talk to him and to be reassured. But so we saw him right at the beginning of June, and we had to have a MRI done, which was an absolute nightmare because they had to sedate her. Well, in order to sedate her, they needed an IV. She was so malnourished and undernourished because she wasn't getting any nutrients. We couldn't get an IV in her. There was no veins. They tried her feet, her ankles, her knees, her wrist, and it was the most nightmarish. That was probably one of the hardest things of this whole journey, was trying to get an IV in this child and watching someone prick your daughter over and over and over. And the Versed wasn't even, nothing was working to get her put under for this, you know, for this IV. And they finally got a little bit of medicine in it. And so you only could do a partial MRI because they didn't have enough medicine or enough, you know, the medicine to make her sleep for the entire MRI. So that was awful, but he got the images that he needed and found out that she had 4 organs elevated. Her stomach, you know, of course, was up there and about the size of a newborn. Then there was her colon, her duodenum. I'm sorry, I always pronounce that wrong. And it looked like her liver was up as well. So he just, you know, he said it was going to be a tricky surgery, and he wasn't sure how his approach should be, if he was going to have to open her up or do it laparoscopically. He, you know, told us during the surgery he would try to do it laparoscopically, but if he needed to, he would open her up. So the day of the surgery, you know, so a surgery was scheduled a little less than a week later. So we put her through our surgery. The anesthesiologist couldn't even get in a vein to anesthetize her, because that was a huge fear of ours, is that they couldn't get a vein to get her the proper anesthesia throughout her surgery. But they assured us, because of the gas, that, you know, when they put the mask on her, that it would plump up her veins and she would be able to be put out. But later we discovered 4 or 5 bruises over her where the anesthesiologist couldn't even get a healthy vein. But lo and behold, she did end up having her surgery. It lasted about 5 hours. And they were able to do it laparoscopically, so we were thrilled. And her hernia was not left or right, but at least they just said it was pretty much in the center, you know, right in the center, where, so he had to perform I pronounced this wrong too, an anesthetist to keep everything in place. So he, you know, wrapped her stomach around her esophagus and sewed everything together. So her esophagus is sewed to her top of her diaphragm, and her stomach at the bottom, so that way her stomach kind of acted as like a block for her hole. And And then, so yeah, and then we found out that her liver actually wasn't up in her chest cavity, that she has a right side eventration. So, so her liver is elevated, but it's not causing her any harm or any damage. She's able to breathe fine. And he said that it's kind of, he described it as a Lego, that the pieces are kind of locking into her diaphragm, and as long as those pieces kind of stay in place, nothing should migrate through that area. So it hasn't been repaired, because he said that would be an extremely invasive surgery that he didn't want to put her through if it wasn't harming her. And we agreed. So right now she still has that, so we have to watch that very closely. And so for a while we were doing every 3-month checkups with him, and then it was going down to 6 months. But because she was so malnourished, we had to enter into the feeding clinic once we got everything solved. We did the feeding clinic, and they were able to get her to gain 9 pounds in 1 year, which we were just thrilled about. But she reherniated again. So the surgery did not hold. Her nissen came undone, which allowed everything to travel up. Dr. Strauch said that her tissues were like tissue paper, and so it tore. So pretty much a year to the day. The first surgery she had 2014 on July 11th. The second surgery she had July 13th on 2015. So she had her second surgery. He redid her nissen, put everything back in its place. He was able to do it laparoscopically again, and that was 3 years ago. So this July will be 3 years since she's had an issue with her CDH. Right now she is a thriving first grader. So here she is. I actually, she's right down the street in our local elementary school. She's doing wonderful. So yeah, we're very in the world of CDH that she didn't have the extensive medical issues that a lot of people have. She still has tons of eating issues, and she's terrified of food because it had to have been so painful for her for those 3 years that she definitely hates food, but she's doing well.
Wow. You are both miracles, Lauren. You and Natalie both. Your poor mother. That's all I can think is your poor mother. It must have been so incredibly hard on her, deja vu, to see that. And wow, just
and
incredible.
That's why that I never heard of cherubs until Natalie came around, because the first thing I did when we found out is, of course, I jumped on Google, and one of the first things that popped up when I searched was cherubs, and it's been so wonderful because I've connected to other families, and I feel like, I can almost give hope to some families because they can see a survivor able to have her own family. And thankfully, my youngest daughter is as normal as a 5-year-old can be, but she doesn't have any of the issues. But I don't want to have our family go through this again. I want to have that research and have that awareness, so hopefully Natalie's child doesn't have to go this, or my parents, don't have to go through this a third time. We need to find the research, because I was always told I couldn't pass it along to my child, and that still could be true, and lightning might have struck our family twice, but our stories are so eerily similar that
yes,
it's just, I don't know.
Yes, your story is a perfect example of why we desperately need more research for CDH. And the researchers are there, they need the funding. And so we're working on that, and we're at Capitol Hill working on that, and you have joined us. And this year you'll be back, and you're bringing Natalie. I'm so excited to meet her next week. So
she's not here today. I didn't want her to miss 2 days of school so close, so I should for the Washington Day and not for this, so I figured she could be with us in pictures.
Absolutely. And we'll go live in this year too, so we'll get her on camera as well so everyone can see. We're down to about 30 seconds, so we're going to have to wrap up, but thank you. That was an incredible story, and you told it very well. I felt like I was there with you. I know that every one of our viewers did too. And your family is amazing. And I will see you in a few days.
All right. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Okay, now we have another celebrity interview. And then one of my favorite people in the whole world, Kristen Agner, who nurse who runs a clinic in Illinois. So Kristen will be up soon. So, all right.